You're being dramatic, Caitlin. It's just an appendix. We've had these front row Elton John tickets for a year. Don't ruin Rocket Man for me. My mother said that while I was being wheeled into emergency surgery, my 5-year-old twins clinging to each other in a hospital waiting room. She didn't miss a note that night, but she almost missed everything else. Because while she was singing along under stage lights, the woman she'd spent 10 years trying to erase from my life walked into that hospital carrying something my mother thought was gone forever. Proof. By the time the encore ended, so did my mother's control over my story. And the family disappointment she never believed in was about to learn why she'd been kept in the dark for so long. Before I get into this, drop where you're watching from right now. I want to know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that because this story is going to need your full attention. Trust me. So let me take you back to the Tuesday that cracked my whole life open. My name is Caitlin. I'm 31 years old, a single mother to twin boys, Mason and Eli, who had just turned 5 that spring. I work remotely as a project coordinator for a logistics company, which sounds stable until you realize it means I'm answering emails at midnight and pretending I have it together by 7 a.m. when 2 little boys need breakfast, matching socks, and someone to convince them that brushing teeth isn't optional. I've been doing this alone since the divorce 3 years ago. My ex-husband, Derek, moved out of state about 6 months after we signed the papers. He sends a check. Sometimes. He calls on birthdays. Sometimes. The twins barely remember him, and honestly, I stopped grieving that a long time ago. You can't miss someone who is never really present. So it's me. Me and 2 5-year-olds in a 3-bedroom house with a mortgage I can barely cover and a refrigerator that's never full enough. And then there's my mother, Linda. Linda is the kind of woman who introduces herself at parties by what she owns, not who she is. She'll tell you about the remodel before she tells you about her grandchildren. She hosts a weekly book club every Tuesday afternoon at her house. I call it the Tuesday Performance. 12 women sitting in a circle drinking Sauvignon Blanc, pretending they read the book. Nobody reads the book. They talk about vacations and other people's marriages and whose daughter is doing better than whose. I was always the daughter doing worse. Linda never said it directly, but she had a way of making it known. Little comments at family dinners. The way she'd pause before answering when someone asked how I was doing. Like she needed a second to craft something that sounded supportive, but carried just enough disappointment underneath. My sister, Brooke, is 2 years younger than me and lives exactly the life my mother designed. Married to a financial advisor. No kids yet because they're waiting for the right season. She drives a white SUV that's never dirty. She and my mother are basically the same person split into 2 bodies. I tell you all this so you understand what happened next wasn't a surprise. It was a pattern finally reaching its conclusion. That Tuesday started normal. I had a call with a client at noon. The boys were playing in the living room, and I was halfway through reheating leftover pasta when it hit me. Not like a cramp. Not like something you breathe through. It was like someone reached inside my lower right side and twisted. Hard. I dropped the fork. Grabbed the counter. My vision went white for a second. Mason noticed first. He came running in and said, "Mommy, why are you on the floor?" I didn't even realize I'd gone down. I pulled myself up. Tried to drink water. Told myself it was stress, bad food, exhaustion. All the things you tell yourself when you're a single mom and being sick isn't an option you can afford. But it got worse. Within 20 minutes, I was sweating through my shirt. The pain was constant now, not waves. I couldn't stand straight. I looked at my boys sitting on the kitchen floor staring at me with those big brown eyes, and I knew I needed help. So I called my mother. She picked up on the 4th ring. I could hear it immediately. The glasses clinking. The laughter. The background noise of women performing friendship. Tuesday book club was in full swing. I said, "Mom, something's really wrong. I'm in a lot of pain. I think I need to go to the hospital." She sighed. Actually sighed. Like I'd interrupted her mid-sentence about a chapter she didn't read. "Caitlin, you always do this. It's probably just gas or something you ate. Take a Tums and lie down. I'm in the middle of hosting." I tried again. I told her I couldn't stand. I told her the boys were scared. I told her I needed someone to either drive me or come watch Mason and Eli so I could get an Uber to the ER. She lowered her voice like she didn't want her friends to hear what she was about to say. Stop being a nuisance. You're a grown woman. Handle it. She hung up. I sat there on my kitchen floor with the phone still pressed against my ear, listening to the silence after the click. My 5-year-olds were watching me. Eli had started crying because Mason told him something was wrong with Mommy. I didn't cry. I didn't have time. I pulled up the Uber app with shaking hands, strapped both boys into their car seats with a pain so sharp I thought I might pass out in the driveway, and rode to the emergency room in the back seat of a stranger's Hyundai while my children held each other's hands beside me. And somewhere across town, my mother poured herself another glass of wine and laughed at something that wasn't even funny. The Uber driver kept glancing at me in the rear-view mirror. I could tell he wanted to say something but didn't know how. I was gripping the door handle with one hand, holding my side with the other, and breathing in short little bursts because full breaths made the pain worse. Mason and Eli were quiet the whole ride. That scared me more than the pain. My boys who never stop talking, who argue over everything, who fill every room with noise, just sat there pressed against each other, watching me like they were memorizing my face in case they needed to remember it later. I don't forgive my mother for a lot of things, but making my 5-year-olds feel like they needed to prepare for the worst? That one sits at the top of the list. We got to the ER at 4:17 p.m. I remember the time because I looked at my phone right before I knelt down in front of both of them in that waiting room. I held each of their faces and said, "If Mommy goes with the doctors, you two sit right here together. Hold each other's hands and don't let go. Mommy's coming back." They both nodded. Eli's chin was already trembling. Mason grabbed his brother's hand before I even finished the sentence. Triage took one look at me and moved fast. A nurse pressed on my lower right side, and I nearly came off the bed. They ran blood, ordered a CT scan. Within 40 minutes, a surgeon I'd never met was standing over me saying words I could barely process through the fog. "Your appendix has perforated. We need to operate now. There's already leaking into your abdominal cavity, and if we wait, this becomes sepsis."
Now.
Not tomorrow. Not let's monitor it.
Now.
I asked if I could make one phone call first. The nurse gave me 90 seconds. I didn't call my mother again. I already knew what that conversation sounded like. I called Brooke. She picked up on the second ring, and the first thing I heard was music. Not background music. Loud, pumping, pre-show music. And voices. Lots of them. "Brooke, I'm at the hospital. My appendix burst. They're taking me into surgery right now, and the boys are sitting alone in the waiting room. I need someone to come get them." There was a pause. Then I heard her cover the phone with her hand and say something muffled to someone next to her. When she came back, her voice had that careful tone people use when they've already made up their mind but want to sound reasonable. "Caitlin, we're literally in the limo right now. The whole family. We're on our way to the Elton John farewell tour. Mom's been planning this for over a year. You know how much these tickets cost." I could hear my mother laughing in the background. Full, loud, unbothered laughter. "Brooke, I'm going into surgery. My children are alone in a hospital waiting room. They're 5. Can you call a neighbor? Or that mom from their preschool? What about Derek's side?" I almost laughed. She said Derek's side, like it was a foreign country she'd never visit.
"Brooke,
please." She went quiet for a moment. I thought maybe something in her shifted. Maybe the sister I remembered from childhood, the one who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, was still somewhere inside that white SUV life. Then she said it. "Mom's been waiting for this for decades, Caitlin. We aren't turning this car around. I'm sorry, but you need to figure this out." The line went dead. I handed the phone back to the nurse. She looked at me with this expression I'll never forget. It wasn't pity exactly. It was recognition. Like she'd seen this before. Like she knew the kind of alone I was. They started the 4. A woman from hospital social services came and sat with Mason and Eli in the waiting room. I found that out later. In that moment, All I knew was that I was being rolled down a hallway under fluorescent lights, staring at ceiling tiles, and the last faces I saw before those operating room doors closed were not the faces of anyone who shared my blood. I went under anesthesia, not knowing if my children would have anyone familiar when I woke up. And 60 miles away, my family was settling into their front row seats, drinks in hand, phones out, ready to capture every second of a concert they'd remember forever. They didn't call the hospital once. Not during the opening act. Not during intermission. Not when Elton played Rocket Man, and my mother probably closed her eyes and swayed like a woman with no weight on her conscience. Not once. Meanwhile, my body was being cut open on a table, infection already spreading, a surgeon racing against a clock my family didn't care enough to watch. My boys sat in plastic chairs under hospital lighting, holding each other's hands exactly like I told them to, a stranger beside them, waiting for someone who loved them to walk through those doors. And someone did. Just not anyone my mother would have expected. I need to tell you about Grandma Jean before I tell you what she did that night. Because if you don't understand the history, you won't understand why her showing up nearly broke me in half. Jean is my ex-husband's mother, Derek's mom. The woman who sat across from me during the worst dinner of my life, when Derek told his family he wanted out of the marriage. She didn't say a word that night, just sat there with her hands folded, looking at her plate while her son dismantled my life between bites of pot roast. After the divorce, things got cold. Not ugly, just cold. Jean sent birthday cards for the twins the first year. I sent a thank you text. She replied with a smiley face. Then the card stopped. Then the text stopped. Then 2 years of nothing. I didn't blame her. Her son left. I assumed she left with him. That's how it usually works. You lose the husband. You lose his people. That's the unspoken tax of divorce nobody warns you about. So when I was lying on that hospital bed, for in my arm, surgical team prepping around me, and the nurse asked me if there was anyone else I could call, Jean's name came out of my mouth before my brain even approved it. I don't know why. Maybe because I'd already been rejected by every person who was supposed to love me unconditionally. Maybe because somewhere deep down I remembered that Jean never raised her voice during the divorce. Never took sides publicly. Never once called me a bad mother even when her own son was building that narrative to justify leaving. I scrolled through my phone with shaking hands. Her number was still there. 2 years of silence sitting in my contacts like a door I'd been afraid to open. I pressed call. She picked up on the third ring. Her voice sounded exactly the same. Steady. A little rough around the edges. Like a woman who's lived enough life to stop decorating her words. Caitlin. She said my name like a question, but not a suspicious one. More like she was surprised but not bothered. Like she'd been waiting for this call, without knowing it. Jean, I'm at Mercy General. My appendix ruptured, and they're taking me into emergency surgery in a few minutes. Mason and Eli are in the waiting room alone. A social worker is sitting with them, but I don't know what happens after that. I don't have anyone else to call. I heard myself say that last part, and it hit me somewhere I wasn't prepared for. I don't have anyone else to call. 31 years old. A mother. A daughter. A sister. And the only person left in my phone who might show up was a woman whose last name I no longer carried. Jean didn't ask me why I hadn't called my mother. She didn't ask me what happened with Derek or why I waited 2 years to reach out. She didn't lecture me about the silence between us or make me feel small for needing her. She asked one question. What's the room number? I told her. I'm 10 minutes away. You go into that surgery and you breathe. I have the boys. That was it. No conditions. No guilt. No hesitation. Just a woman who heard that 2 little boys were alone and decided that everything else could wait. I hung up and the tears came. Not the quiet kind. The kind that make your whole chest shake and the nurses stop what they're doing and look at you. One of them squeezed my hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. They wheeled me in at 5:43 p.m. The anesthesia hit fast. The last thing I remember thinking was please let her get there in time. Please don't let my boys sit there wondering if anyone's coming. I found out later that Jean walked into that waiting room at 5:51 p.m. 8 minutes after I went under. Mason saw her first. He didn't recognize her right away. He was only 3 the last time they'd been in the same room. But Eli, my quiet one, the one who remembers everything, looked up at her and said, "You're the lady from the pictures." I kept a photo of Jean on the fridge.
I don't know why.
Maybe I always knew she wasn't the one who left. Her son did. She just got dragged out with the current. Jean knelt down on that hospital floor in her jacket and her grocery store shoes, and she pulled both my boys into her arms and said, "I'm here now. Nobody's going anywhere." The social worker told me later that the twins stopped crying within minutes. That Jean sat between them reading a book she'd grabbed from the hospital gift shop until they fell asleep on her lap. Both of them. On her lap. 2 boys she hadn't seen in 2 years, sleeping on a woman my mother once called that side of the family, like they were a disease. I woke up feeling like someone had taken a bat to the inside of my body. The lights were too bright.
My mouth was dry.
There was a tube in my arm and a machine beeping next to my head, and for about 10 seconds I didn't know where I was. Then it all came back. The kitchen floor. The Uber. The phone calls. My boys. I tried to sit up and a nurse put her hand on my shoulder and told me to stay down. She said the surgery went well, but the infection had been worse than they initially thought. The appendix hadn't just burst. It had been leaking for hours before I even got to the hospital. They had to flush the abdominal cavity. I was on heavy antibiotics through the 4, and I wasn't going anywhere for at least 3 days. 3 days. I asked about Mason and Eli before I asked about myself. The nurse smiled and said, "The woman who came for them? She hasn't left. She's been in the family lounge all night with both boys. They're asleep. All night. Jean stayed all night. She came into my room the next morning carrying 2 cups of coffee and a bag from the cafeteria. She looked tired. The kind of tired you get when you sleep sitting up in a chair with 2 5-year-olds draped across you. But she didn't complain. She sat down next to my bed and handed me the coffee and said, "Boys are eating pancakes downstairs with the nicest nurse I've ever met. You need to focus on healing." I tried to thank her, and she cut me off. Not rudely, just firmly. Like gratitude made her uncomfortable when the task wasn't finished yet. "Don't thank me. Just rest." That first day, I mostly slept. The painkillers kept pulling me under. Every time I surfaced, Jean was there. Sometimes reading. Sometimes on her phone. Sometimes just sitting with her eyes closed. But always there. By the second day, I was alert enough to reach for my phone. I wish I hadn't. The first thing that loaded was Instagram. And right at the top of my feed, there was my mother. Front row. Elton John behind a grand piano bathed in golden light. Linda's face glowing. Brooke next to her with a drink raised. Both of them smiling like the world had handed them exactly what they deserved. The caption read, "Best night ever. Once in a lifetime with my favorite girl. Hashtag family first. Hashtag living our best life. Hashtag Elton John farewell. Family first." I read that twice. Then I locked my phone and put it face down on the mattress. Jean saw. She didn't say anything.
She didn't need to.
She just reached over and refilled my water cup like that was the only thing that mattered right now. By day 3, the doctors said I could go home, but I needed full rest for at least 2 weeks. No lifting. No driving. No bending. No carrying my boys. For a single mother of twins, that list might as well have said no breathing. I started doing the math in my head. Who picks them up from preschool? Who makes their lunches? Who gives them baths? Who reads to them at night? Who holds Eli when he has a nightmare? Who keeps Mason from climbing everything in the house like it's a personal challenge? Jean watched me spiraling from the chair next to my bed. I think she could see the numbers running behind my eyes because she leaned forward and said something I wasn't expecting. "I'm coming home with you. I already packed a bag. It's in my car." I stared at her. "Jean, you don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to. I'm doing it because those boys need stability right now, and you can't even stand up straight. This isn't a discussion." She said it the way she said everything. No drama. No performance. Just fact. We left the hospital that afternoon. Jean drove my car. The twins sat in the back seat talking over each other the entire ride home, telling me everything Grandma Jean had done while I was asleep. She let them pick the cereal. She did the voices when she read to them. She let Eli sleep with the light on without making him feel babyish about it. When we pulled into the driveway, I looked at my house through the car window and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Like someone had my back. Jean carried both bags inside, settled the boys in front of a movie, and walked straight into my kitchen. Within an hour, she had the fridge cleaned out, groceries listed, and a load of laundry going. Nobody asked her to. Nobody assigned her a task. She just saw what needed doing and did it. That's the difference between people who love you and people who just claim to. 10 days after surgery, I was on the couch with a pillow pressed against my stomach because laughing, coughing, or moving too fast still sent a sharp pain through my core. The boys were at the kitchen table with Jean, doing some art project involving glue sticks and an alarming amount of glitter. The house was cleaner than it had been in months. The fridge was full. There were labeled containers in the freezer with meals prepped for the next 2 weeks. Jean had even fixed the squeaky cabinet door under the sink that I'd been ignoring since last winter. Nobody asked her to do any of it. Then the doorbell rang. Jean looked at me. I looked at her. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't told anyone I was home except my employer and the twins' preschool. I heard them before I saw them. My mother's voice carries through walls. Always has. It's the kind of voice that enters a room 2 full seconds before she does. Jean opened the door and stepped aside without a word. Linda walked in first, Brooke right behind her, and I swear on everything I love, they were both wearing their Elton John tour t-shirts, the official merchandise, black with gold lettering, like they'd coordinated the outfit specifically for this visit. Linda was carrying a bouquet. I used that word loosely. It was one of those pre-wrapped bundles from the grocery store checkout line. The kind with the rubber bands still around the stems and the $4.99 sticker they didn't bother to peel off. She set it on the coffee table like she was delivering a peace treaty. There she is, our little warrior. Linda said that while scanning my living room like she was appraising real estate. Her eyes moved from the organized shelves to the vacuumed carpet to the fresh flowers Jean had put on the windowsill 3 days earlier. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about the surgery. She didn't ask about the infection or the 3 days in the hospital or the fact that her grandsons had been alone in a waiting room while she was swaying to Benny and the Jets. The first thing out of her mouth after the warrior comment was, "You could have at least tidied up the porch, Caitlin. The welcome mat is filthy." I was 10 days post-surgery. I had staples in my abdomen, and my mother was critiquing my welcome mat. Brooke sat down on the armchair across from me without being invited. She pulled out her phone immediately, scrolling through something while half listening. She hadn't said a word to me yet. Not hello. Not how are you. Not sorry I hung up on you while you were being wheeled into an operating room. Nothing. Linda walked over to the kitchen where the boys were doing their art project. She hadn't seen them in over a month, but she didn't kneel down, didn't hug them. She stood over them and said, "Oh my goodness, what a mess. Jean, you're letting them use glitter? That's going to be everywhere." First words to her grandsons in over a month, and it was a complaint about craft supplies. She pulled out her phone and angled it toward the boys. "Smile for Grandma's Facebook, sweethearts. Mason, look up. Eli, stop frowning." Eli wasn't frowning. That's just his face when he's concentrating. She would know that if she ever paid attention long enough to learn the difference. She snapped 3 photos.
Check them.
Adjusted the angle. Took 2 more. Then she walked away from them without another word. Back to the living room. Back to performing. "I still can't believe you didn't call someone closer, Caitlin. You always do this. You make everything into a bigger deal than it needs to be. An appendix is routine surgery. People get them out every day." I stared at her.
Routine.
My appendix had ruptured and leaked infection into my body. I spent 3 days on 4 antibiotics. I couldn't pick up my own children. And she was calling it routine while standing in my living room wearing a concert t-shirt from the night she chose not to come. Brooke finally looked up from her phone. "Mom's right. You should have just called a neighbor. We were already committed to the show." It's not like we could have done anything at the hospital anyway. Couldn't have done anything. Like sitting with your sister's children while she's under anesthesia is nothing. Like being present is nothing. Like showing up is some kind of optional side quest in the game of family. Linda started rearranging my throw pillows, actually fluffing and repositioning the pillows on my couch while I sat there with surgical staples in my body. She needed my house to look a certain way for the visit she was already scripting in her head for book club next Tuesday. Then Jean walked in from the laundry room. Jean came in carrying a folded basket of the boys' laundry. She set it down on the dining table quietly. She didn't slam it, didn't make a scene. She just placed it there like she'd been doing it for years. Linda looked at her the way you'd look at a stain on a white dress. Like Jean's presence in this house was an inconvenience she hadn't budgeted for.
Jean.
I didn't realize you were still here.
Still here.
Like Jean was a guest who had overstayed. Like the woman who had slept on my guest room floor the first night because the boys were scared and one of her close was somehow the one who didn't belong. Jean didn't react. She just stood there with her hands at her sides and looked at Linda the way a teacher looks at a student who hasn't done the reading. Patient. Measured. But completely done. I've been here for 10 days, Linda. Well, that's very generous of you, but I'm sure Caitlin can manage now. Family's here. That word. Family. It landed in the room like a glass breaking on tile. Jean nodded slowly. Not in agreement. More like she was giving Linda one final moment to hear herself before what came next. Family.
Okay.
Let me tell you what family looked like 10 days ago, since you weren't there to see it. Linda opened her mouth. Jean kept going. I got a phone call at 5:30 in the evening from a woman I hadn't spoken to in 2 years. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She told me her appendix had ruptured. She was about to go into emergency surgery, and her 2 5-year-old boys were sitting alone in a hospital waiting room because every single person in her family told her they had something better to do. Brooke shifted in her chair. She didn't look up from her phone, but her thumb stopped scrolling. I drove to that hospital in 9 minutes. I found Mason and Eli sitting in plastic chairs with a social worker they'd never met. Eli was crying. Mason wasn't, and that was worse. Because that little boy had decided somebody needed to be brave since none of the adults in his life were showing up. Linda's jaw tightened. She crossed her arms. I could see her assembling a defense behind her eyes. But Jean wasn't giving her the space to launch it. I sat in that waiting room for 4 hours, not knowing if Caitlin was going to come out of surgery okay. 4 hours, Linda. I read your grandson's 3 books from the hospital gift shop. I bought them crackers from a vending machine for dinner because nobody had fed them since lunch. I held them both on my lap until they fell asleep. And when Caitlin came out of surgery and the doctor told me the infection had been worse than expected, I stayed. I stayed that night. I stayed the next day. And the next. She took one step closer to Linda. Not aggressive. Just close enough that the words wouldn't miss. I have been in this house for 10 days. I've cooked 21 meals. I've done 14 loads of laundry. I've driven those boys to preschool and picked them up every single day. I've held Eli at 2 in the morning when he woke up crying because he thought his mother was going to die. I've answered every question Mason had about why there were staples in his mommy's tummy. I've done all of it. Every single hour. While you were posting concert selfies with a hashtag that said family first. Linda's face changed. The composure cracked just a little. Not guilt. She wasn't built for guilt. It was something closer to exposure. The look of someone who just realized the mask slipped in a room full of witnesses. Now you walk in here 10 days later in your concert t-shirt with a $4 bouquet, and the first thing you do is complain about the welcome mat. You didn't ask about the surgery. You didn't ask about the scar. You didn't ask those boys how they felt when their mother disappeared behind operating room doors and nobody they knew was there to hold them. Jean's voice didn't waver once. Not a single crack. She wasn't performing anger. She was delivering a verdict. You didn't miss a surgery, Linda. You chose a song over your daughter's life. You aren't a grandmother. You're a tourist in these children's lives. And your visa just expired. She pointed toward the door.
Calmly.
Like she was giving directions to a stranger. Get out. Linda looked at me. I think she expected me to intervene, to soften it, to play the peacemaker the way I'd been trained to do for 31 years. I looked right back at her and said nothing. Brooke stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked toward the door without a word. Linda followed. She stopped at the threshold and turned around, mouth open, ready to deliver one final performance. Jean closed the door before she could. The house was quiet after the door closed. Not the heavy kind of quiet that follows a fight. The clean kind. The kind that shows up when something toxic finally leaves the room and the air starts to settle. Mason and Eli were still at the kitchen table. Glitter everywhere. They hadn't heard any of it. Jean had kept her voice low enough to dismantle my mother without disturbing two 5-year-olds 10 feet away. That's control. That's what it looks like when someone is angry for the right reasons and still puts the children first. I sat on that couch and stared at the closed door for a long time. I kept waiting for the guilt to show up. The kind I'd been trained to carry since I was a kid. The automatic flinch that always came after I disappointed my mother or failed to smooth something over. The voice in my head that always said you should have handled that better, Caitlin. You should have been softer. You should have made it easier for her. It didn't come. For the first time in 31 years, that voice was quiet. Jean sat down next to me. She didn't say anything inspiring. She didn't give me a speech about strength or moving on, or how everything happens for a reason. She just sat there, present. That was enough. After a while, I picked up my phone. I opened my banking app. I scrolled to the recurring transfers and found the one I'd been sending every month for the past 3 years. $500. Every single month. To my parents' joint account. Linda told me it was for their car lease. Said they were struggling after my father's hours got cut. Said it was temporary. I never questioned it because that's what daughters do when their mothers ask.
You don't audit the request.
You just send the money and hope it buys you a little bit of love. But front row Elton John farewell tour tickets aren't cheap. I looked it up later. 2 seats in that section run about $800 each. Add the limo. Add the merchandise. Add the drinks. That's a family that spent well over $2,000 on a single night out while their daughter funded their car payment every month. I pressed cancel on the recurring transfer. The app asked me to confirm. I confirmed. 3 years of payments. $18,000 total. Gone to people who couldn't drive 10 minutes to sit with their grandsons during an emergency. I don't know what stung more, the money or the math. Then I did something I should have done a long time ago. I opened my contacts and blocked 2 numbers. Linda.
Brooke.
No dramatic text. No long email explaining my feelings. No voicemail giving them one last chance to understand. I just blocked them. Quietly. The same way Jean had closed that door. Without ceremony. People who love you don't need a performance to stay. And people who don't won't be convinced by one. That evening, Jean made spaghetti. The boys' favorite. She let them stir the sauce even though Eli got it on the counter and Mason somehow got it in his hair. She didn't scold them. She laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes from a person who actually enjoys being in the room with children instead of performing for a camera. After dinner, I sat across from her at the kitchen table while the boys played in the living room. I had something I needed to say, and I didn't know how to say it without crying, so I just said it fast. Jean, I don't want you to leave. I'm not asking you for a favor. I'm asking you to be part of our life. Permanently. The boys need you. I need you. And I should have called you 2 years ago. She looked at me over her coffee cup. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't let anything fall. She set the cup down and said, I never left, Caitlin. Your mother told me to stay away. Told me I wasn't part of the family anymore after the divorce. I respected it because I thought that's what you wanted too. I didn't know that. 3 years of silence, and it wasn't Jean who walked away. It was Linda who built the wall. One more thing my mother controlled without me ever knowing. I never wanted that, I said. I know that now. She reached across the table and held my hand. No speech. No conditions. Just a hand and a promise that didn't need words. That night, I tucked my boys in and stood in the hallway listening to them breathe. My house was full in a way it hadn't been in years. Not because there were more people in it, because the right person was finally in it. Sometimes you have to lose your biological family to find your real one. And sometimes your real one was there all along, waiting on the other side of a phone call you were too afraid to make. I'm not afraid anymore. 2 weeks after I blocked Linda, she showed up at my door. Not to apologize. To collect. She stood on that filthy welcome mat she hated so much and told me my monthly payment hadn't gone through and that her car lease was overdue. She drove to my house to ask for money. Not to ask about my scar. Not to ask about her grandsons. Money. I opened the door just enough for her to see my face and said, "If you can afford front row Elton John tickets, a limo, and matching merchandise, you can afford a Honda payment. We're done here." She called me ungrateful. She called me dramatic. She said I was punishing her over one night. One night. Like that one night existed in a vacuum. Like it wasn't connected to 31 years of being the daughter who is never quite enough. Brooke tried next. She had a friend request me from a new Instagram account to send me a message. It said, "Mom is really hurt. You're tearing this family apart over an appendix." Over an appendix. Over an appendix that nearly killed me while they harmonized with 1,000 strangers to a song about flying away from everything that holds you down. The irony almost made me laugh. I never responded. Now let me tell you about the proof. Because I promised you that at the beginning, and I don't break promises. 3 months after all of this, Jean was helping me organize my guest room. The room that was now hers. She pulled a shoebox from her bag that she'd been holding onto since the night at the hospital. She said she brought it with her that night because she didn't know what was going to happen and she wanted me to have it no matter what. Inside were 14 birthday cards. 2 for every year since the twins were born. 1 for each boy, and 4 for me. Every single one stamped and sealed and returned to sender. On the back of each envelope, in my mother's handwriting, were the words, "Not at this address." Jean had been sending cards every year. My mother had been intercepting them and sending them back. That was the proof. 14 cards full of love that were stolen before they ever reached us. My mother didn't just choose a concert over me. She spent years making sure I believed nobody on the other side was trying. She was wrong. So if you're watching this and you have a Jean in your life, someone your family told you didn't care, someone who got erased from your story by people who wanted control, pick up the phone. Make the call. You might find out the silence was never their choice. And to my mother, if you're watching this from whatever Tuesday book club you're hosting right now with your wine and your women and your performance of a perfect life, I want you to know something. I finally heard Rocket Man the way it was meant to be heard. It's a song about someone who's been launched into cold, empty space by the people who were supposed to keep them grounded. But I landed, Mom. I landed. And Jean was there to catch me. Don't forget to subscribe if this story moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And drop a comment telling me, who's your Jean?